Thanks very much. Ellen Rutten, University of Amsterdam. Ellen?
Let me just go to the correct document. Yeah. I start my talk with two glimpses of Wikipedia readers at work. The first glimpse comes from an analysis of Russian language Wikipedia entries on Ukrainian history by anthropologist Hélène Dunayevsky. And this analysis appeared as book chapter in two colleagues in my book, Memory, Conflict and New Media, which you see on the slide. In her analysis, Dunayevsky explains that the controversial issues that she studied were often, I'm citing her, simple disagreements over the spelling of geographical names. These names, she then explains, I'm citing her again, may differ depending on the reference languages, Russian or Ukrainian. Russian Kiev versus Ukrainian Kyiv, Kharkov, Kharkiv, na Ukraine, v Ukraine, etc. It is interesting to note that the case of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, is also quoted within Wikipedia's list of the lamest added wars in the English section. This is actually a Wikipedia entry, an existing entry. My second workflow glimpse comes from this article by my PhD student, Mikola Machortych, who is present here today, and to whom I'm grateful because we had a brief chat about this paper. So thanks in advance, Mikola. It deals with history memes on Lurka Moria, a Russian language encyclopedia of web folklore based on Wikimedia technology. At one point, Machortych builds on Limor Schiffman's research, which some of you may know, on memes, and says, I'm citing him, among 6 features that, according to Schiffman, contribute to the successful distribution of memes, flawed masculinity seems to be particularly susceptible to parody via World War II memes. Among these are the nationalhomosexualisti, national homosexuals, Hitler, Hitler, Dobrovolets, fascist, incorrect spelling of the word fascist, and other memes. While Schiffman interprets the prominence of flawed masculinity memes as an extreme manifestation of the representation of men in mass media, I posit that there are other reasons for their prominence among World War II memes. Many flawed masculinity memes, Hitler or nationalhomosexualisti, for instance, can be traced back to Soviet wartime posters and jokes that depicted Nazi leaders as weaklings and homosexuals. Some more recent inventions, Dobrovolets or Hitler, however, can also be connected with the recent rise of homophobia in Russian mass media. I know that especially the second one is a lengthy citation, and it may be somewhat confusing to see these fragments without the larger arguments into which they feed, but I don't share them to ponder these larger arguments. I selected them for a different reason, because they illustrate two things that I discussed today. First of all, they illustrate how Wikipedia can act as a locus for historical controversies or historical memory, or what in this collaborative research project Alexander Etkind, others, and I called memory wars. I also show them because the same fragments exemplify how historical, cultural historical, anthropological and linguistic knowledge can feed and complicate our reading in Wikipedia. So Fabian, I was grateful for your answer because, as I said, I want to sort of precisely the contact between cultural historians and media scholars is what I want to look at today. In this talk, I examine the same two theses. In more pointed terms, what I do today is, first of all, explore how we can read Wikipedia within the confines of so-called digital memory studies. And I think up to this point, I could also have been in the other panel, but we are talking about controversy, so I sort of belong in both, perhaps. And the second point is I want to examine why and how we can benefit from more joint, or put more correctly, more transdisciplinary readings of Wikipedia practices. Now, a disclaimer before I start, which is a bit similar, I think, to Tommaso's disclaimer at the start. I build primarily on my experience as what you could call Wikipedia research manager. I did conduct small-scale empirical research on Wikipedia. I do so occasionally, but I do not engage in the same ongoing close or distant reading of the platform that some of you, like, for instance, Fabian, do. So my contribution to Wikipedia scholarship lies rather in supervising, editing, promoting a series of publications and research on Wikipedia by colleagues. To begin with, some words on digital memory study as Wikipedia research tool. Now, digital memory, that term is sometimes used for an academic subdiscipline that intervened in an existing discipline. And I'm speaking of the discipline of cultural or collective memory studies, that is, studies not of history proper, but of contemporary perceptions of the past. From the early 2000s onwards, cultural memory studies have boasted this very tangible, heightened sensitivity towards mediation. New media are carriers of all forms of memory. Cultural memory is always shared with the help of symbolic artifacts that mediate between individuals. we embody, create, and am placed within digital memories. In these and related observations, such leading memory scholars as Andreas Huyssen and Anne Rigney ponder the insights that memory never stands on itself, but is always digitally or otherwise mediated. Now, between 2010 and today, I participated together with colleagues in a number of scholarly initiatives that theorize digital memories, and more specifically, post-socialist digital memories, so memories that circulate online in Russia, Ukraine, and other post-socialist states. In this HERA sub-project, in this spring school, these special journal issues, and in this edited volume that you saw earlier, colleagues and I explored digital media as arenas for Eastern European web wars, that is, online discursive wars on the region's turbulent collective memory. Now, in doing so, we dealt with different online platforms. My colleagues discussed, for instance, Twitter discourse on the Ukrainian famine of the 1930s, Facebook talk of the Katyn massacre in Poland in World War II, and they also studied local memory discourse in Wikipedia, as this selection of publications illustrates. These authors explore Wikipedia in precisely the role that interests us today, as, and I'm citing your panel description, Richard, as a controversy machine rather than a safely neutral encyclopedic tool, if such tools ever existed in the first place, as we've heard this morning. Now, they unpack Russian Holy which is a very beautiful word, a very Anglophone Russian equivalent for online flaming wars, so holy wars, Holy. They mine and cross-linguistically compare Wikipedia entries on a Ukrainian World War II controversy. They examine Wikipedia discourse on what they call the Soviet story, and they contextualize Lurka Moria writing on these and other Russian history-devoted memes. Now, while area experts and Slavic scholars were unraveling, let me go back for a second, were unraveling local memory construction in Wikipedia, simultaneously media, communication, data, and literary experts have similarly been unpacking Wikipedia as memory site. This study, which our Contropedia colleagues share on their website, is a case in point. So is this article by our host Richard Rogers and Emina Sendiarevic, which happens to deal actually with what you could call Eastern European memory or Southeast European memory. And memory controversies are discussed too, albeit as part of a broader cross-linguistic and conflict-focused analysis in these publications and projects, one of whose co-founders is with us today. Now, together, I'm thinking, did I paste in the Contropedia or the Omnipedia page? Yeah, this Omnipedia. No, that's what I meant to paste in. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, what we can see is that together, and I mean all together, this set of publications signals a modest boom in readings of Wikipedia as memory tool. They helpfully explore the workings of Wikipedia as Fundgrube for knowledge about historical controversies. But this afternoon, I don't merely flag that boom. In the last bit of my talk, I want to examine, or rather critically interrogate, the disciplinary ramifications of existing Wikipedia memory scholarship. Now, what are these disciplinary ramifications? A plain look at their autobiographies tells us that in my first overview, we are dealing with 3 then PhD candidates in Slavic studies. One finished his PhD in the meantime, one cultural historian, and one anthropologist. In my second overview, we look at 2 comparative literature scholars. One, I'm not sure about Emina, but I think she calls herself a criticaster and storyteller, so she's sort of harder to put in a box, and former media student. 4 media, technology, computer scientists, and for Omnipedia, I simply use the 3 email addresses on the homepage's search incentive, and 5 scholars with training in both physics and computational science. Now, I want to use this information and these publications to return to my second question today. Why or how does it pay to do more transdisciplinary Wikipedia reading? Now, one possible response to this question is the answer, but Wikipedia readers already read transdisciplinarily. 3 examples. Richard Rogers, our host, teamed up with native speaker and storyteller Emina Sendiarevic in this publication. So he's a media scholar, but also a native speaker. This analysis by literary scholars is housed on the website of Contropedia, a research project by media and computational experts with which I, as a Slavic scholar and cultural historian, have also crossed paths. And Mikola Magortic, the author of this article, programs himself, but he also actively cooperates with professional computational scientists for his PhD research. So transdisciplinary cooperation is certainly not lacking in the examples that we saw. And I know from informal conversations with colleagues that the desire to work transdisciplinarily is very persistent, both in my field, but also here in Amsterdam, certainly in media and computer sciences. Another answer, my answer to the same question, why do we need more transdisciplinary Wikipedia reading, is the current desire and efforts do not suffice. It would not hurt to phrase the same answer more positively, to facilitate more fundamental transdisciplinary teamwork in studying Wikipedia as memory tools. And I'll give you 3 examples again to explain why I claim this. For the first, I return to my first workflow glimpse. A Wikipedia reader studying the debate that Dunajewski mentions needs to possess linguistic sensitivity. In this BBC analysis on that controversy of na Ukrainie versus v Ukrainie, etymology professor Anatoly Lieberman explains this controversy. Those who say na Ukrainie, which translates as the Ukraine, in the Ukraine, so he explains, refer to the country as it was called when it was a Soviet republic and, in the eyes of many Russians, a Russian province. By contrast, those who opt for v Ukrainie, in Ukraine, without an article, refer to Ukraine as an autonomous nation. When Ukraine became independent, Ukrainians started dropping the article when mentioning their country, and this is now standard practice among those who plead for preserving Ukrainian autonomy. And to understand why that article matters to them, because I know it's a bit technical, just think of how you would say the Provence about France's Provence region, but you would never say the France. Lieberman also says that Ukraine literally means borderland, and that native speakers who say the Ukraine are well aware that they are referring to Ukraine as the borderland, so the borderland of Russia, a land that forms a border of Russia. Ukraine sayers, by contrast, know that the same literal meaning is less emphatic once you drop the article. And again, to understand what I'm saying, simply compare how it sounds if I say I'm going to the borderland for a holiday or I'm going to borderland for a holiday. Lieberman concludes by claiming that in dropping the article before their nation's name, Ukrainians make no random linguistic move. They perform a hugely symbolic act of linguistic independence. Now, native speakers make the difference that Lieberman outlines in practice, but few are able to theorize as precisely as he does, and as I've now hopefully done, I'm hoping that they sounded a bit boring and dry because it's sort of hardcore to show you that this is hardcore linguistics. So few are able to theorize as precisely as he does why that difference matters politically, and by implication why edit wars on this linguistic controversy are so persistent. Dunajewski does not cite Lieberman, but as an anthropologist and native Ukrainian, she's sensitive to the formative role of these linguistic subtleties. On the downside, and with this observation I conclude my first example, the same Dunajewski is less strong in her analysis of Wikipedia's digital dynamics. Her chapter offers relatively meager engagement with theorizing on Wikipedia, and here cooperation with a media expert or computer scientist could have substantially deepened the argument. My second example is Magortic's article on Lurkamorje. Magortic here complements and challenges the insights of Schiffman on memes. Magortic singles out the words that are used in World War II memes. He explains elsewhere how the misspelling of some words produces comic effects, and he provides the memes with cultural historical contextualization when he links their visual language to that of Soviet wartime posters and jokes. That Magortic can complicate Schiffman's observations has everything to do with his disciplinary background. He holds a BA in history and MAs in archaeology and Euroculture, and he's a native speaker of Russian and Ukrainian. And it is this linguistic and historical or cultural historical expertise that enables him to fine-tune Schiffman's insight. In return from our supervision session, so I gently remind you that this author is my own PhD student, I know that to craft solid analysis, Mikola sorely needs computational and media scholarship and tools. He actively uses digital methods tools, for instance, to make his analysis. So in this case, the very point of departure for his linguistic and historical analysis is an observation by Schiffman, an associate professor in communication and journalism. So what is wrong with this example, you might think by this point in my argument, because this argument already benefits from transdisciplinary fusions. But I'm not sure if the fusion now works optimally. Whether Magortig's observations will reach Schiffman or the broader community of communication scholars in return is the question, because this article was published in Digital Icons, a journal on new media usage in Central and Eastern Europe, and that journal is quite prominent in our field, but it reaches mostly Slavists and area specialists. My last example is the PLOS article. Its authors use a sophisticated, tailor-made algorithm for a study of memory effects in conflictuous Wikipedia entries, one that offers welcome computational food for my colleagues in Slavic studies, history, and cultural history. They use this algorithm to test the following qualitative hypothesis. I'm citing them. It appears that the discussions on talk pages are dominated by continual back and forth between those editors who hardly change their opinion. And, lower in this screenshot, the less prolific editors appear more negative, more fierce, sometimes hysterical in tone, sometimes downright irrational. The authors then continue to test their hypothesis, but they do not back it up by linguistic or cultural historical empirical examples or evidence. This choice impacts negatively on the argument's power. The hypotheses are, after all, based on web wars, on online memory wars that take the shape of discursive and, by implication, language combats. From which words did these authors deduct which editors adopted a fierce, hysterical tone? Which concrete words do the editors use, and what does the cultural history of these words tell us about the practice of blindly defending one's opinion? According to Islamic studies scholar Yasir Suleiman, the war of words, that is, the analysis of the rhetoric of linguistic conflict, is precisely what enables us, I'm citing him, to tap into the values that inform and sustain conflict, end of citation. But to readers of this +1 analysis, the war of words between the editors remains opaque. Now, in discussing these three examples, my goal was simple. I wanted to demonstrate why it pays to study Wikipedia, or in this case, to study memory controversy construction on Wikipedia more transdisciplinarily than we now do. And in saying that, I'm not dreaming of an ideal but impossible world in which Dunajewski, Magortig, and the +1 authors have all the time and all the means in the world to widen their disciplinary gaze. What I do advocate is, first of all, more awareness of the disciplinary limitations that existing Wikipedia readings boast. But secondly, I also propose that we explore practical possibilities that facilitate small-scale, maybe you could call it cooperation-light constructions between linguists, cultural historians, anthropologists, and experts in media, communication, and technology. And I'm thinking of very down-to-earth options. One, and with this option I want to conclude, could be an online platform where Wikipedia and memory scholars can easily sign up, share, and jointly discuss recent research and get in touch. Now, I'm sure that there are enough interested scholars from any of those disciplines who are interested in either knowing and using each other's research, or co-authoring and crafting arguments, or simply helping colleagues out with small questions. On such a platform, the +1 authors could crowd-plant their hypotheses among linguists and cultural historians. Mikola could have shared and asked feedback on his Lurkamori analysis from media or communication scholars. Our digital methods could attend memory scholars to their tools. Others could solicit in-depth linguistic knowledge to develop linguistically more inclusive computational solutions for the study of Wikipedia, etc., etc. So with this proposal for a concrete Wikipedia memory platform, I conclude. And I'm really throwing it on the table just to test its viability. So I would gladly continue reflection on this proposal and to my talk in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tommaso Venturini will respond.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ellen, for your very interesting presentation. I have 4 little questions for you. The first one is about our conception of history changes when, thanks to Wikipedia, but more generally, thanks to digital traceability, we have access to the history of history. Let me explain. Scholars working on collective memory, such as yourself and others, have since long time scraped history from all these positivistic affordances. So we now know that we have known for a long time that history is plural, that it's unstable, that it's uncertain. And most importantly, that is constantly reenacted and transformed in the present. That the past is not something that is stable, but it's something that is constantly modified by the way we reenact it, we reuse it, we reactivate it in our present interaction. But what is interesting about the work you have been doing on Wikipedia and in general on digital media is that we now have traces of this transformation. We can follow the subsequent transformation that the same historical past goes through. So basically, in Wikipedia, we literally have an history page for all the historical articles. So how does the access of the traceability of all these different changes the way in which we look at history and more generally to our collective past? And the second question that is connected to that is that how this change or may change the way we teach history. And how would you, have you reflected on how, for example, Wikipedia could be used as a tool to teach history, not just as any encyclopedia could be used as a tool to teach history, but as this specific encyclopedia that has an history of the history might be used. And the third question would be, do you think that this is specifically a research or teaching affordance of Wikipedia, or have you found that in other digital platform and media as well? Because what is interesting about your presentation and your book more generally is that Wikipedia is only one of the many different set of digital traces that you have used, and so maybe you have interesting things to say about the comparison of these specific type of traces against other types of traces. And then if we have the time, I don't know, the last question would be about the specific focus of your research, that is to say, not history in general, but the history of post-socialist countries. Because it seems to me, but you will correct me if I'm wrong, that this is a particularly well-chosen topic for this kind of research, because to a certain extent is a phenomenon in which there's no majority report on what the history is. There are plenty of minority reports, but there's none of these report as is more mainstream than the other. And so this multiplicity and this controversy are particularly evident. But what about other pieces of history, let's say, when there is a clear majority report with a clear mainstream account of the past? Would you use the same type of research, or would you transform your methods and your approach?
Thanks very much. Only a few minutes, right, Richard? Because these are wonderful questions. I would love to talk very long about them, but I'll be short. Your first question was about the history of history access, right? Yeah. Does this change the way in which we now look at history? I think I can cluster that with your second question. I think it does change the way in which we teach history. Well, not just the way in which we teach history and the way in which we look at history, indeed, because probably this thing that especially cultural memory historians have been, this idea that cultural memory historians have been promoting for so long, that history is not stable, etc., I think that idea becomes more part of the public domain now. It's becoming more of a popularly known thing because you have these controversies. So I think that sort of makes it more of a publicly known insight. We can see history debates at work in Wikipedia, and not everyone will click the edit pages, but there's news reporting on it, etc. So we see that more, it's more visible. In teaching history, yes, in fact, I have been using this in teaching literary history, and I really enjoyed doing that. When I was teaching a class on 20th century Russian literature, I asked my students to write Wikipedia lemmas on those authors which did not have such a lemma, Russian authors. And I really noticed that for them it changed how they looked at history, because they suddenly realized, I can actually say who this author was, I can actually choose highlights in this description. They also looked more critically at other Wikipedia entries. So I think it can help students in seeing that history is pluralistic. That's very short. There's much more to say about that, but I think that's sort of the short answer. Then I think what you said about, is this specific for Wikipedia, what you've been talking about today, or for other platforms as well? I think that the most honest answer is it certainly is applicable to other platforms. I was going to this Wikipedia session and sort of try to focus only on Wikipedia. I would probably need to think a bit longer about how this is different in Wikipedia. Obviously, edit wars are not the same as discussions on Twitter, where the discussions are your sources, whereas in Wikipedia, you first go to a lemma, and then only in the second step you usually go and visit the edit wars. So that would be one difference. I would need more time to really think about that. But I think several of the things that I've said today apply to other social media platforms. Maybe even that proposal that I make for a platform for Wikipedia memory scholars could also be a platform for social media memory scholars. It could be broader. And then the focus of research, yes, post-socialist countries are a very specific case, because there is indeed no, there is no standard on what history was in these countries, or there is a standard. In Russia, for instance, there is an official standard, but it's a top-down standard, which very much has a political agenda. I think Dutch history textbooks also have a political agenda, but there is more discussion about them. There's more discussion possible. And one metaphor that we used in our book to explain how these two situations differ is that of the digital archaeologists. So we said there's this famous research by Marita Sturken on memory tourism. There are scholars who have said, well, people who are writing online about history are like digital tourists of history. And we said, well, in Eastern Europe, post-socialist countries, what we see is not so much tourists of history and not digital tourists of history, because in Western Europe, in the US, discourse about history is very much commodified. You can buy lots of products, also on related to the Holocaust, so also related to the black pages of history. But in Central and Eastern Europe, in post-socialist states, you cannot, especially those black pages of history are much more difficult to get to. So what you see, therefore, is people who are trying to dig up what really happened in the past. So they work more like archaeologists. They are discussing the question, what really happened in the past? And they never really get to an answer, because there is no formal discussion, there is no formal debate which says, well, this is more or less the consensus about what happened in the past. And that really impacts, I think, very fiercely on what we see in Wikipedia and other social media too. I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks very much. So we will now take a break and reconvene at 3:40. With talks by Brent Hecht from the University of Minnesota on Omnipedia, which is a system that compares the same article across different Wikipedia language versions, as well as Bernie Hogan from the Oxford Internet Institute, who will talk about those editors based in Africa and what they're editing. We'll see you back here at 3:40. At the end of those two presentations, we will have a general Q&A session where you are invited to pose questions to all of the presenters here today. We also have a live stream on bit.ly, so bit.ly/readingwikipedia, where those watching the live stream are welcome to pose questions in the comment space. It's a YouTube stream. And we will collect, compile, and curate those questions and pose them also in the final Q&A. So we'll see you at 3:40.